Well, welcome everybody. It's Nick McEwen Hall here from Open Door Coaching. Happy Mental Health Month to everybody and Mental Health Day, World Mental Health Day tomorrow, 10th of the 10th every year this year on a Saturday. Welcome along. It's so great to be spending half an hour of our afternoon together presenting this really important topic here about how to start the conversation with someone about their mental health. First of all, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we're all meeting today and their continued connection to the land, waters and communities of Australia. We'd like to pay our respects to them and to their elders past, present and emerging. So today we're going to have a look at what stops us having the conversation with someone about their mental health. Yeah, we're going to have a look at that. We're going to look at some common myths and misunderstandings, and I'm going to give you some tips and some I think some confidence, I hope, to start having these conversations that we often find ourselves wondering if we should have or not. So these sessions, these coaching cafe sessions, if you haven't been to them before, they happen every Friday at midday and they're completely free, of course, always about something to do with people or coaching or mental health, that kind of thing. So welcome along. It's definitely a shared learning experience. So if you've got ideas or thoughts about what we're talking about, feel free, please, to pop your thoughts into the chat box or the Q&A box, whatever's handiest for you there from the control panel. It's really about having some thought-provoking conversation every Friday. Gets us thinking about things in different ways. Now, if you are an ICF credentialed coach, these sessions do accrue CCE units or CCE points. So feel free to email support@opendoorcoaching.com.au after the session and the fabulous Sonia will get you sorted out with your CCEUs. So let's jump into it. First of all, there is a great coaching cafe that I did a little while ago on our blog there on the website called Recognising the Signs of Depression or Anxiety in the Workplace. And this is a really great one to go and have a look at alongside what we're going to cover today, because it shows you how to sort of spot the signs of these two very common mental illnesses. These are the two most common mental illnesses in Australia. So have a look at that blog too, because the information that's in there marries up really nicely with what we're going to cover about today. So really this conversation, this conversation today, this webinar has really come up because a lot of our clients tell us that they often feel like there's a conversation to be had, or they feel like there might be something that something might be going on with somebody with their mental health, but they're not quite sure if or how or when perhaps to have the conversation. And usually it's because they've seen something that we've covered on this other blog that we've done, you know, one of these signs or symptoms that we pick up with somebody that sparks our interest. So yeah, go and have a look at that blog as well. It's another little short half-hour one. So here in Australia, the stats are as follows. 1 in 5 Australian adults experience a mental illness every year. So 1 in 5 adults, that's 16 to 84-year-olds. So 1 in 5 every year. It's quite a high percentage, it's 20%. And it doesn't sound like a huge number, but when we think about the impact, when we think about the effect that that has for people and on society and on our general well-being as a society, that number is fairly high. And I really encourage people to stop next time they're in a group of people, or they see a group of people, or they might be driving along and just look at, you know, what's 1 in 5 look like? You know, if you're at the supermarket, have a look around and work out how many people are there, and then work out what 20% of that group looks like, because it's quite surprising how big that is. And so I really like to ask people and encourage people to flex their kind of muscles around this stuff a little bit, you know, practice having a look to get some awareness. Now, the one stat that I think we can all really address here is this next one, which is that 65% of these people, these 1 in 5, don't get any professional help at all. They don't receive any professional assistance for their mental health problems, for their mental illnesses. And this is a bit of a problem because we know that actually treatment, when it's done by a professional and when it's evidence-based, treatment is very effective and can give that person a lot of relief. You know, it can give them a lot of relief from suffering. So, you know, getting people connected to professional help is a really good thing that we could be aiming for. And when we're thinking about whether we should or we shouldn't have a conversation with someone about what we think might be going on, being a mental health problem, this stat should help us kind of fall on the side of the fence that says, yeah, I'm going to have this conversation. I'm going to try and have this conversation. I'm going to bring it up. You know, I'm going to talk to someone, because we know that these conversations increase help seeking. So when we actually do have the conversation with people, those people go on to have higher rates of help seeking than people where the conversation hasn't happened. So we've got a really active role to play in getting people connected to support and assistance. So what stops us having this conversation? I'd like to hear from you what the sort of thoughts are around why you might have stopped having the conversation in the past, or why you think other people don't have this conversation. Let me know in the chat box or the Q&A box. There's a lot of these reasons that come up, and we'll go through them in a second. I've got some ideas about what some of the common ones are, but I'd like to hear from you as well. Now, what do you think is the reason that people don't have these conversations? Yeah, thanks, Mark. He says uncomfortable to raise it. Yeah, it can feel uncomfortable or awkward. Sometimes people say, you know, I don't know if it's my place. Not sure if it's my business. That kind of thought, that kind of thinking along those lines. Yeah, it can feel uncomfortable. Sometimes it can make us feel anxious. Yeah. Mia says, not sure how they'll be perceived in a workplace. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of that sort of stuff, and that kind of comes down to stigma, doesn't it? You know, not sure how people will feel about something. You know, what will they think of me if I have this conversation? Carly says we're worried about making the person uncomfortable. Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right there, Carly. You know, a lot of the times we err on the side of caution because we don't want to make things worse. Yeah, we don't want to make that person feel more out of place, or more suffering, or more uncomfortable. So we err on the side of not having the conversation. Yeah, great, well done. So here are some things that I hear when I talk to people about this particular topic, about why they're not having it. Sophie says, sometimes it's because we feel like we're crossing a professional boundary to a personal boundary. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's a really interesting one. Absolutely. It's the whole thing where we say, oh yeah, well, we leave our personal problems at the door when we go to work, you know. We know that doesn't happen. And so it's the same with mental health, right? Same with physical health. If we've got a cold, we can't just magically stop having a cold when we walk in the front door. Yeah, if we've got a broken leg, well, we don't walk in the front door and while we're in the office, our leg isn't broken. It's the same with mental health and mental illness. So yeah, we have this this perception almost around it in that way. So yeah, good thoughts. These are the ones that I hear people say. They say, oh, well, I'm not really sure if there is a problem. You know, I think there might be, but I'm not sure about it. I'm not 100% certain. Yeah, I'm not 100%. So I don't want to have that conversation if I'm not really sure, you know. I want to be absolutely certain that there is an issue before I start having that conversation. It's this kind of thinking or this kind of thought. Lots of people say, I just don't know how to have this conversation. Just don't know how to do it. You know, what's an appropriate way to bring it up? You know, how do I open the conversation? What words do I use? What words shouldn't I use? And so on. I hear this one a lot. You know, we don't want to make things worse for them. I don't want to make it worse. So if someone's already experiencing mental health problems, you know, I don't want to make that worse for them by walking up to them and talking about it. You know, I don't want to do that. This is a kind of a thought that people have. It's a bit of a myth, and we're going to cover some myths and misconceptions in a second. This one comes up a lot. It's really none of my business, you know, particularly in a workplace context. A lot of people sort of go, oh, well, you know, yeah, I'm their boss or I'm their colleague. It's not really my business to talk to them about their mental health. You know, it's kind of none of my business what's going on for them. It's a private thing, you know, it's something that I should keep my nose out of. That sort of thinking. And we've got some interesting webinars coming up next week that address this in a lot of technical kind of legal kind of ways, but we'll talk about that a bit later. And stigma and fear are the other big ones, you know. There's a stigma about mental health and mental illness still in this country. It's quite massive. And just outright fear, you know, we're just fearful of having a conversation. So these are the sort of reasons that people tell me when I'm talking to them about, you know, what stops them from having these sorts of conversations, and variations on these points, you know. If you've got any others, feel free to pop them in the chat box. But these are the ones that come up commonly. So a lot of these are based in myths and misunderstandings around mental health. And I think if we spend some time busting some of these myths and working through some of these misunderstandings, it's useful to prepare us, to enable us even to have these conversations. And the first one that I hear a lot is, if I ask someone about their mental health, I might make it worse. And it's an interesting idea because, sure, if someone's anxious or they're depressed or they're nervous or whatever it might be, and we start having a conversation with them, then sure, for a little while, they might be a little bit more anxious than normal. You know, then in that moment, in that conversation, their anxiety might peak. But on the long term, in a long-term big picture, it doesn't have a negative effect. In fact, it usually has quite the opposite. Usually people who experience mental illnesses and mental health problems are quite relieved when someone says, hey, you know, I've noticed something and I want to have a chat to you about it. I want to help you. I want to, you know, check in with you. I understand, or at least I see what's going on. You know, there's an empathy response. And so people respond really positively to that. They really actually quite like it. It gives them a bit of relief. So this is quite a common myth and misunderstanding. And it's tied with this one here, that people don't want us interfering in their business. I mean, generally, that's probably true. But in this instance, when we're thinking about mental health problems or mental illnesses, people experience a lot of stigma about those things. So when you express genuine concern and care for someone, often it's perceived as a very positive thing. Yeah, they don't mind that you've brought it up. They're quite appreciative of that. And when we go through the full mental health first aid training program, we see some really good examples of that, about how that kind of works for people. You know, they might say initially they didn't really enjoy it or didn't really like it, but looking back in retrospect, it was absolutely the right thing to do, to intervene or to at least put it on the table for a conversation. I think a lot of people think that, you know, people are already probably connected to support. So, you know, if we've seen somebody and we think that they've been experiencing something for a while, there's a kind of a possibility maybe that we think that, well, they're probably already getting support, you know, and often it's not the case. We've just seen in the statistics, 65% of people don't get any professional help. So we can't really sit here and think, well, yeah, they're probably already connected, because statistically, the vast majority of people aren't, right? The last one that I've got on my list before I hand it over to you is that it has to be perfect. And I understand where this is coming from. It's coming from a place of wanting to do a good job, you know, wanting to do the right thing, wanting to do the best thing for the person. But it doesn't have to be a perfect conversation. Yeah, those of you, and there's a few of you on the line who've gone through the mental health first aid training with me, feel free to comment on my thoughts here. But my thoughts are that, you know, it's better to have a clunky conversation that's not the best, it's not the way that you'd ideally like to have it, than to have no conversation at all when it comes to mental health. Because if the person's not connected to professional support, then the level of suffering that person goes through can be large, you know, and as soon as we connect them to help, that suffering tends to reduce. So I think it's better to have a conversation rather than no conversation. And that conversation doesn't have to be perfect. It really doesn't have to be perfect. And I talk about that a lot in the mental health first aid program, because, you know, we do have this kind of desire to want to do it right every time. And we shouldn't set ourselves up to that bar. Yeah, we don't need to. Tony says, absolutely agreed. People are forgiving of the lack of skill in the conversation when they know you're interested in their mental health and well-being. Yeah, absolutely. That's tied in with that thing I was saying before, where people feel a lot of relief when they're being asked about their health and their well-being in a very genuine way, yeah, in a caring, empathetic way. Yeah, not in a sort of judgmental way, but in a really warm, rapport-filled, um, empathetic, genuine way. So yeah, I'd love to know what else you think here. What are some other myths and misunderstandings that come into play here? Yeah, let me know in the chat box. So Sophie says, remember, you don't have to provide a solution to their issues, just assist them to reach out. Yeah, that's right. And when we're thinking about being mental health first aiders or being, leaders or managers or colleagues, often we're not qualified to give the solutions anyway. So what we want to do is engage with the person and try and encourage them to move towards getting some support from a professional who will then look at the appropriate solution for that person. So yeah, we don't have to be the solution. Even I think people worry when they start the conversation that the person will expect them to have a solution, and this is why they stop. They don't have the conversation because they say, well, I know enough to think that there's something maybe not quite right, but if they ask me what I should do, I just don't know. And that's okay. You don't have to know. You don't have to know. And all of these things that we're talking about, all these sort of question marks, all these sort of maybe dead ends in our thinking about, well, I don't know how to do that, or I'm not sure how to frame it up, or I don't know what language to have, or I don't know what the solutions would be. It's all covered when we look at mental health first aid training. So having the conversation, these are my kind of tips on how to actually go about having it. Here are some ideas to think about. Check-in conversations with people can make a big difference, and they can be just little chats, yeah? Little chats along the way that can make a big conversation easier. So what I mean by this is if you're just having regular check-ins, particularly if you're in a lockdown area at the moment, or you have been, you might just be checking in a bit more often in a bit more explicit terms, saying, look, hey, I'm just checking in with you. How are you going from a mental health perspective? How's your mental health going? There's a lot going on. How are you, in that perspective? Just ask really clearly, just ask really directly, how are you going? How's your mental health at the moment? And the more that we talk about mental health and the more that we normalize it, the easier these bigger conversations are when we have to have them. So there's lots of little tiny check-ins along the way are a really good little tip. It makes it just part of the conversation that you're having with people. Almost like, on a Monday you say, hey, how was your weekend? That's really normal because we do it a lot. Yeah. So if we just take the same approach to asking about mental health, then it becomes easy to talk about. And in turn, it becomes easier for someone to say, actually, my mental health is not as good as it could be. Or actually, it's not great at the moment. Yeah. And maybe I need some help. So I think if we just normalize it by these little chats, when we have to have a really tough conversation, it gets a little bit easier because we've had some practice and people are used to talking about it. I think the other thing that comes up, particularly at the moment, is that we've got to look after ourselves and the other people in our workplaces, yeah, as the pressure mounts for people, particularly at the moment. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. There's a lot of mental health impacts that are happening on people, and workplaces are changing dramatically. Dramatically changing. People are working from different locations. They might be working from home. They may have lost their work. They may be unable to go to work. There's all this sort of stuff, this extra stuff that's happening on top of our existing 1 in 5 stat at the moment. So we've really got to look after ourselves and look into and look after the other people around us as well, in a very kind of deliberate way at the moment, I think. Yeah, really kind of make a point of doing it. So here's some wording that you could use to start the conversation. Yeah. And usually this is going to happen after you've noticed some sort of change in the person. Again, in the mental health first aid course, we talk about, what are some of these changes? What are these sorts of behavioural or physical signs that we might see in somebody that may indicate that something's going on for them with a mental health perspective, in their mental health, that's getting to be in the poor kind of end of the spectrum. So you'll initially notice, a behaviour or a physical kind of change in somebody that gets your attention. And here's a couple of ways that you can start to open the conversation. I've noticed a change. I really care about you. I'd like to help. Can we have a conversation? Would you like to have a conversation? Or, I've noticed a few things lately. I thought I'd check in with you about them. Yeah, I've noticed a few things. I thought I'd check in with you. Or I've noticed that, you know, if we get to use a more specific example, I've noticed lately in meetings you've really not been participating as much as you used to, and I just thought I'd check in with you about that. Yeah. Or I've noticed that you've stopped coming to the Zoom drinks on Friday nights, Friday afternoons. So I just thought I'd check in because you used to love doing that. You know, you used to always be there. Just thought I'd check in with you about that. Yeah. That sort of conversation. It doesn't have to be, hello, John, I'd like to talk to you about your mental health. It doesn't have to be like that. It can be quite conversational. You know, notice a few things. I thought I'd check in with you about them. So the real point here is that having the conversation, there isn't a set sort of formula of how you would do it. There's not really a set way of how to open the conversation, the words you would use, but certainly we're sort of saying, make it a normal kind of conversation. Mark says, is it appropriate to say, is everything okay? I think so too. I think that is right. I think that's fine to say, Mark. I think some people, when they're asked that, they'll say, yeah, I'm fine. You know, and if we have a concern that they're actually not, it can be a little bit difficult to kind of come back from that, because if you keep pressing, sometimes the person goes, I've just said I'm fine. You know, I've just said I'm all right. Leave me alone, you know. And we have to respect that as well, of course. If someone says, look, I don't want to talk about it, or whatever the case may be, then yes, we've got to sort of say, you know, okay, that's fine. But you could say, is everything okay? Yeah, I'd add some more content. I'd say, look, I've noticed a few things and just wanted to check if everything's all right, you know. I'm a fan of being a bit more direct in this space, you know, really tell them what you want them to say, you know, what answer you want. So if you want to know if they're experiencing mental health problems, then we've got to ask a question about mental health problems. You know, we've got to be direct with it. Because if we want to ask them about, you know, the state of their mental health, then we have to ask a question that's kind of framed around that. If we kind of say, you know, how's everything going? It's very broad. Yeah, it's very broad. It's maybe too broad. So we want to get quite specific, but in a gentle, open sort of way. Yeah, Mark, you've made a good comment there. It's a closed question. It can be, and closed questions are okay in this space, you know, as opposed to our normal kind of coaching work that we might do, where closed questions aren't really what we want to use. In mental health first aid kind of conversations, closed questions can be okay, where we do want a definite one or the other kind of answer. So yeah, they can be used here. But I think if we, just like we normally do with our coaching, if we were focused in on the right question, that's a better approach. Yeah, and it can sometimes be good to kind of even write down how you'll have the conversation, or just write it down. You know, what words will you use? What words will I say? Yeah, what am I seeing that's making me wonder about checking in with this person? So these are my tips. I mean, they're not, as I said before, it's not a script, but it's giving you a bit of a sense of, you know, this is how we have this conversation. It's just like you would with a good friend. If you're worried about a good friend, how would you have that conversation? Yeah, how would you do it? And in the mental health first aid course, we cover a lot more depth here, a lot more detail about what we do say, what we don't say, and those sorts of things. But I want you to have the confidence to be confident in your questions and be confident in opening up these conversations, because the conversation that you're pausing on, the conversation that you fall on the side of the fence where you don't have it, that could be the conversation that literally saves that person's life. So remember, had beats perfect every time in my book. Had beats perfect. So it's better to have a conversation that's not quite how you'd like it to go, or not quite, you know, clear enough, or it might be a bit clunky, or you might have used some you know, the wrong language. But it's better to have a conversation than not to, because you know you want to have a perfect conversation. So had beats perfect every time. So I want to show you a little bit about mental health first aid before we go. It's a really amazing course, and there are some people on the line who have done the program, so I'd love to hear your thoughts here as well. But really, I think in our work as coaches and leaders and managers, we are in such a good position to observe changes in people, which are often the first signs that a mental health issue is bubbling away, or that is developing or is worsening. So I think we get a really good opportunity to really see into the other people's worlds, because we are in high rapport with them. You know, we're in long-term kind of knowledge of them. It's really important. And that trusting relationship allows our people, our clients, our colleagues, our staff, our teams to share more with us. And so I think for this reason, we are very well positioned to be able to take some action, you know, and to really support people with their mental health, you know, urging them to get that assistance. So the mental health first aid course gives you a whole model to use, very similar to, you know, your physical first aid model, doctors ABCD, the same sort of model that we can use to structure a conversation. It helps you feel prepared and confident to have the conversations. When we survey people before and after the course, we usually see on average a doubling of the confidence. So before, they might rate that they're a 4 out of 10 confident to have the conversation, and afterwards they rate that they're a 10 or a 9 or an 8. So it's quite a big jump in this confidence space, which I think helps us have these conversations. It also helps us to be aware of what works and what doesn't work. And there's definitely both of these things. And we want to cover those both off in the mental health first aid course. But it's about breaking down stigma. It's about changing lives and saving lives. And that might sound very dramatic, but it's absolutely true. Just the same as physical first aid can save a life. You know, if you learn how to do CPR, you can save a life. It's the same with mental health first aid and mental illnesses. Mark says, I assume it's in the tone and appropriate place and time. In the coffee line, not so good. Yeah, time and place for these conversations is important too. We want to be aware of privacy and confidentiality, and making sure that the person's going to feel comfortable, make sure that we've got enough time to have these conversations. Yeah, time and place is a very good consideration. So the mental health first aid program is available completely online. It's done via an e-learning package and 2 webinars with myself. It's fully online, virtual. You can attend from anywhere in Australia. It's $229. And if you're an ICF coach, it will accrue you 24 CCEUs, and that's 20 in core competencies and 4 in resource development. So they are the good CCEUs that are hard to get. There's certainly a good number of CCEUs there. You get a manual, of course, which is pictured here, and you get to spend 2 sessions with me really unpacking what you learn in the e-learning and putting it into practice and applying the skills, because that's what we want you to do, right? We want you to leave and go and use the skills. So we cover depression, anxiety, psychosis, and substance use in the 2 sessions that we go through. There's also information in the package about eating disorders and gambling problems. Depression and anxiety are the two highest prevalence mental health issues in the country. So we cover those in quite some depth. Anxiety is the leading one, post-traumatic stress to be specific. And then we look at mental health in crisis. So that looks like things like suicidal thoughts, non-suicidal self-injury. We look at panic attacks, trauma. We look at the effects of drug and alcohol use and psychotic states, and so on and so forth. So it's quite a comprehensive package of information, but it's highly practical as well. It's super practical. It's really about how to have a conversation with someone that is structured in such a way that it encourages them to go and get that support and that assistance. I think it's a really valuable course for everyone who's working with people. Really, really valuable. A great skill set to sit alongside coaching and leadership skill sets for sure. So I'd love to hear any thoughts or questions you may have, or ideas that you might have in this space, or if there's a light bulb that's gone on, or a question mark you have in your mind about this topic. Yeah, let me know. Sophie says, thanks for the session. Looking forward to attending the mental health first aid program. Oh, excellent. Yep. Great. Yeah, we'd love to see you on that, Sophie. That'd be awesome. Yeah. So while you're doing that, while you're having a think about your questions, I would like to introduce you and show you our Leader as Coach program, really snappy 2-day coaching essentials program for leaders. It's worth having a look at. It's a great first step if you are just looking into coaching world. The coaching program there, Leader as Coach, and of course the mental health first aid program on our website as well. So Mark says, do surveys exist to measure mental health? Yeah, there are therapeutic tools that mental health professionals would use, and they're survey based, sort of like a psychometric kind of thing. But that would be something that a professional mental health worker would use with people. You can certainly ask people. One of the great things I like to do is to say to someone, here is a continuum, you know, where on one end you've got terrible, on one end you've got great, and you draw a line and you say, where on this line are you today with your mental health? And just get them to draw a line. You know, that's a really quick little survey you can do, you know, and you might say to them, where were you yesterday? And if it's different, you know, how come? What's going on? Tell me a bit more about that, like a scaling question. Mia says, are there prerequisites to do the courses? No, there's not. You need to just be basic in Australia and over the age of 18. Yeah, absolutely. That's for the mental health first aid program. For Leader as Coach, there's no prerequisite either. Yeah, they're good for everybody. Carly says, thanks for the session. I'm a HR business partner and looking into leadership coaching training. Cool, Carly, that's great. Yeah, have a look at our Leader as Coach program and probably our Certificate 4 in Workplace and Business Coaching program as well. Mia says, which course covers workplace wellness? I would say of the courses that we offer, to have a look at mental health first aid as the first point of call. Yeah, start there. You might then look at Leader as Coach as a bit of a complement to those skills, you know, from a basic coaching skill set point of view. Yeah, feel free to give me a call as well. I'll put my number in the chat box. Feel free to give me a call and we can talk about programs and options and all that sort of stuff, yeah. So the number is 1300 006 324. So thank you everybody for spending half an hour of time. The last thing I'd love you to do is check out our website under the Mental Health First Aid tab at the top. Next week we have Mental Health Awareness Week, and it's a week full of amazing, inspiring speakers. We've got speakers from Bombara Consulting, Black Dog Institute, Love Me, Love You, Synergy Global. I'll be presenting Mental Health First Aid as well. It's a week full of amazing mental health awareness topics. So we'd love to see you there as well. So thank you everybody for joining us today on this Coaching Cafe Friday. My name is Nick McEwen-Hall from Open Door Coaching. It's been an absolute pleasure sharing this hour with you. Thanks so much, and we will see you on a webinar soon. Bye for now.